He is as much a proponent for college football expansion, for everybody having a chance to play, because you never know what happens when you play the game. Fox Sports' Tim Brando joins us on 365 Sports with Craig Paul, and I'm David Smoak. Tim, how about the Green Wave?
Happy New Year, fellas.
You too.
Great to, and I will tell you that you're the only people I'm talking to today, okay? Because this feels like New Year's Day to me. I've always thought that when it fell on a Sunday, because this goes all the way back to when West Virginia played Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, and I had my family out with me, and the game was actually on January 2nd because it fell on a Sunday. It's almost like you get two New Year's Days when you have that happen. So I've always loved it when New Year's Day fell on a Sunday. It's always like you could enjoy it, you could party, and then have a day to recover before the big games are played. I know a lot of fans want the semifinals to be played today rather than, a glorified exhibition like the Rose Bowl. But that'll all change once we do have expansion. The Rose Bowl's coveted 4:00 Eastern time is going to be gone when the playoff is expanded in 24. So we're on our way to good times. But yeah, today, what happened in Dallas, at Jerry World is Exhibit A. I mean, and what TCU did in beating Michigan is, Exhibit A plus for why we've been in a position, I think, for a long time to have 12 or I'm a proponent for maybe going to 16, and I think the chance still exists that could happen by the time we actually get there to implement it. And if not the first year, maybe the second year in 25. But yeah, when you hear people say, and you guys see it, I'm sure, on social media all the time, Bama would be favored by 3 touchdowns. So I don't care how much a team would be favored by. That's not the point. You got to play the game. These are human beings that are involved, and it's not like USC laid down. Caleb Williams played a great game, and I think proved to a lot of people that it definitely mattered to him to play in this game, regardless of having won the Heisman and regardless of the potential of maybe having that injury that he had only aggravated because he wasn't completely healthy. USC's defense, though, was a liability and has been a liability most of the season. And Tulane exploited that with a great runner. Ty Spears was unreal. It was almost like watching another form of Deuce Vaughn, only faster. I mean, he's faster than Deuce Vaughn. And Little 22 was just carving that USC defense apart. And Pratt was also magnificent. I thought their quarterback was tremendous. But again, this is a Tulane team that we knew had beaten Kansas State, and we know that Kansas State is good. Okay? But people around the country that are watching and trying to keep up with college football hear very little about teams out of the American Conference. Hell, they hear very little about Kansas State, and they hear very little about TCU. So, of course, they're not going to hear much about a team out of the Group of Five. But that team, by the way, regardless of where they're ranked, and they weren't in the top 12, but remember, in the new format, a guaranteed spot for a Group of Five school will be there, and that spot would have been Tulane. So imagine if that game had been part of a 12-team playoff. How much more exciting would it have been? All right? So I think that, plus the fact that TCU was able to play and not even close to their best offensively, but play physical, with the Big Ten champions that had just boat raced Ohio State and Columbus and beat them when they weren't playing their best offensively. Tells you all you need to know. We need expansion. And the game is going to be enhanced so much once it happens.
Tim, I also think that this bowl season has kind of proved that the roster chasms that people believe exist aren't as big as as they think they are. With the
Right.
the transfer portal, much like free agency in professional sports, has evened the playing field a little bit. You can't, hoard people on your roster anymore. And, there are people contributing all over the place that are in the transfer portal now. NIL might work as kind of an inverse salary cap, but still, I think the rosters are not all that far off when you're looking at the top 15 teams.
No, absolutely. Now, we had some blowouts, but the LSU win over Purdue was I think, expected, and particularly with Aiden O'Connell not playing quarterback and, Braum gone, and they're in the situation with an interim coach. But, LSU served notice, I think, how good they are and how great they're going to be in the short-term future under Brian Kelly. But pretty much every other game was really competitive and fun to watch. I thought that was a gutsy win over Illinois by Mississippi State today. And, those kids were playing with a heavy heart. There's no question that the notion that the brand names are, have a huge, wide margin in terms of the tier of college football they're in versus everybody else, that's now a myth. It's an absolute myth. And it's perpetuated by a lazy media that chooses to cover the college football that they want to cover, not what should be covered. And I think that the hand will be changed. And I'm not blaming other media members. Look, I'm pointing the finger even at the place where I work. We don't spend nearly enough time on college football during the week at FS1. We don't. It's a nonstop debate show about Tom Brady this and LeBron James that, and nobody really cares about college football until the weekend starts. And the guys that are doing the studio shows, whether it's Game Day or Big Noon, they do a great job, but they are covering what? Primarily the games that are of high profile, and to some extent, because we're in the business of promoting our network, we're going to talk a lot more about the games that are going to be on our air. I think that when you're doing 2 and 3 hour shows, you can cover more than that. It doesn't have to be a pom-pom waving segment. You can actually cover what's going on with other teams that are doing wonderful things. Tulane got very little, if any, coverage at all this year. And that was because they were never a threat to play the role of Cincinnati. They lost the game. There were chances that they would lose another game, but they were still a 12-2 football team that had a lot of talent and just recorded the greatest turnaround in FBS history. Think about that. They were 2-10, okay? But last year they played an Oklahoma game at Norman that they could have won. And then a hurricane hit. Hurricane Ida came through, and they lost their home field. They had to move and play out of Birmingham, Alabama. So they were having to vacate New Orleans, and they lost a lot of close games. They were 2-10. We saw them beat, a Kansas State team earlier this year. And even when Kansas State made its run to win the Big 12 title game, Tulane was still an afterthought. No one was talking about what they had done in beating Kansas State earlier in the season. So part of this is falling on us, those of us in the national media that cover college football. It's time to cover more than 5 or 6 teams. And that's definitely going to be forced on us. And I put myself in that group. It's going to be forced on national television to do a better job of covering these teams and the totality of the sport when we're talking about 12 teams getting in or 16 teams getting in than when only 4 teams do. Okay? So that's my thought on it. And hopefully what happened this weekend, which I thought was the greatest weekend in modern day college football history. What happened with those 2 semifinals was unprecedented. And what Tulane did today was unprecedented.
Tim, definitely want to ask you, about that second semifinal, that ring in the new year. But sticking on Tulane and USC real quick, Lincoln Riley's first year in Los Angeles, 11-3, didn't win the Pac-12, didn't win the Cotton Bowl, but still 11 wins. Better, about what you expected, worse than you expected for year one with Riley and the Trojans?
Well, overall, it was better than I expected. I mean, it was. I think he's going to have to make some big-time moves defensively. I could see him firing his defensive coordinator. I could, after what happened to them today. I mean, they got gashed. Their defensive front. Listen, think about what I'm from Louisiana. I know what Tulane's facilities are like, and they have improved. They've invested in their program. But if you look at the size of that school, the enrollment, the amount of revenue that's available to them versus what USC has, I mean, it's not close. They have to be upset with what they were seeing from a defensive standpoint. So I think that he's got to remedy that situation somehow, some way. If USC is going to not only go into the Big Ten and make noise, but to go beyond that, to get into the college football playoff and win, he's got to deal with that. And so, you know, their defensive front just could not get it done. And Tui Palatu, by the way, who's an all-conference performer, was the only guy that was giving the Tulane offensive line any problem whatsoever.
Tim, your thoughts? You mentioned the speed of TCU. You mentioned Ohio State would give Georgia everything they could handle, and they did almost beat them. But let's start with TCU and what we saw as they jumped early. They kept fighting off Michigan, and in the end, they just had too much firepower.
Won a Big 12 game.
They were resilient. They were resilient. That's the one word that you have to say. They weren't on their game offensively. They dropped some passes. Okay, they did. Johnston did make a big play on a 3rd and 12 that was just a beautiful ad-lib job by Duggan when he was getting major pressure. It was a check down throw that Johnston turned into a touchdown, and a very explosive play that I thought happened at a moment in time when Michigan was ready to maybe assert itself and take control of the momentum in the game. That kind of resiliency is something that those of us that have watched TCU all season have seen. Okay, I saw them challenged by Oklahoma State before they got all banged up. I saw them have to come from 18 down in the second half when Spencer and I were calling that game in mid-October in Fort Worth, and they got to 7-0. That's what they did in those games, and that's what they had to do here. They did not have their best. You look at the numbers on Duggan. He was like 14 for 29 for about 250, 259, something like that. Not his best day, not by a long shot. So he had dropped passes. There were guys that I thought Jared Wiley was a non-factor. Michigan did take him out of the game, and that tight end is really outstanding. I think he's in line with the Bowers kid from Georgia. So in my estimation, TCU gutted out that game without playing their best. So if they improve offensively, which I know they can, and their defense just continues to play with that edge, you know, D. Winters was incredible. I think they were a little bit pissed about the attitudes of Michigan in a way they were going to attack the 3-3-5, as though that was some sort of gimmicky, small-time finesse conference defense. Because what that defense is designed to do, as you guys know, is plug the guys that are down linemen. They plug gaps and they allow linebackers like Johnson, the Navy transfer, and D. Winters to make plays, and those guys made plays. And the 2 pick sixes were incredible. The corners for TCU are among the best. Clark, certainly. Josh Newton had a huge game, the transfer from ULM, who you think about their safeties can play corner if need be. So I think TCU does have a puncher's chance in this game with Georgia. You're going to hear it all week, how they don't match up, how Georgia's too big, how their sideline-to-sideline speed is too great, and that this is a different animal, and that Georgia won't allow TCU to do what Ohio State did. And I'm here to tell you, those people that are saying that, okay, they haven't seen what we've seen. So I think it's going to be a highly competitive championship game. I really do.
Yeah, I haven't seen the TCU doesn't seem to be bothered by anything that goes wrong in a game. They just kind of move on to the next, no matter what happens. The other game, Ohio State and Georgia. I mean, literally, as the clock struck midnight on the new year, Ohio State loses on a kick that I know that will haunt Noah Ruggles for the rest of his life. Poor guy, but I'm kind of curious on your perspective on Ohio State fans and their kind of recent attitude towards Ryan Day, because he's lost 2 in a row to Michigan, and then he lost a thriller to the defending national champ who's lost 1 game in 2 years. How do you think that they should look at him compared to how they are really looking at him right now?
Well, I think they're out of their minds, okay? I think they're absolutely clueless. I say this all the time. I've been asked many years over, what's the greatest thing about college football? And I'll immediately say the fans. And then somebody will say, well, what's the worst thing about college football? Answer is the fans, okay? And especially at certain places. The blue blood programs where they have this belief that no matter what, they are supposed to win just because we are the Ohio State. And that's just not the way this thing works anymore. The game is so much more competitive, and you might have a great deal of history and tradition and more banners at your stadium than anybody else, but the competition level is far greater, and more schools, whether it's in your conference or outside your conference, are investing as much money as maybe you are. And they don't understand that. They can't conceive of any way that a team like theirs could lose any game ever. You have to win them all. 2 things I think in that game that stand out to me in the aftermath of it. I really thought it was unfortunate, not so much that the targeting was taken off, okay, on the play with Marvin Harrison when he got concussed in the back of the end zone, but the fact that happened and that Harrison could not return to the game. They had already lost their tight end, okay? He was gone, and they already were down 2 receivers. So it basically was Fleming, Adbuka, and Harrison. And when Harrison was gone, then Georgia was able to tighten up its secondary because they didn't have to respect somebody beating them deep as much as if those other guys had been available. Harrison was a problem. So losing him, having the targeting penalty taken off, and then losing him because the kid was concussed was problematic. And then just an enormous head coaching call by Kirby Smart that we all just have to tip our cap. When he called the timeout before the fake punt, that was a game saver. If that drive stays alive, then I think Georgia would not have had time to pull off the comeback to get the win.
Yeah.
That was just, I don't know who upstairs alerted him that they were in the formation they were in, but whoever got to them and got to him quickly, deserves a raise. If it was one of his analysts or his special teams coordinator, either way, that was a tremendous call. That was a bench decision that helped save the game.
We have a listener, a viewer, Steve, who wrote me an email that I was going to use later in the show, but I'm going to read it to you to get your reaction. He goes, so you want a 12-team playoff, which he's not against it so much, the expansion. The number of injuries to key players in 2 games was alarming in the semifinals. Now, imagine if that's 5 versus 12, 6 for 11, and now you need to get ready to go play a team that is higher who had the week off. Everyone's sure they want this expansion.
Most of those injuries were the kind of injuries that, players go down because they're cramping. Players go down because they got a Charlie horse. And the coaches are always going to tell them to go down. Go down the moment you feel you can't go. And when you're involved, not just that, a lot of those are mental as well as physical fatigue circumstances. And it stops play, yes. And it looks like guys are ready to be scraped off the tarmac and taken to the locker room. I don't believe that. I really don't. Today's athletes are in better shape than they've ever been. They get IVs when they go in for halftime. As far as the additional games, unless you're a team that didn't get a bye in a 12-team format, you're only going to be playing one extra game. For those teams that maybe would be ranked between 12 and 5, okay, if they were to go forward and win their way into the title game, they would have 2 extra games. But if you're one of the top 4 teams and you get a bye the opening week, you're only playing one additional game. So that argument is garbage.
Tim, your thoughts about just college football in general? The NFL is just, we know it's the 800-pound gorilla times whatever else, but you mentioned the fans are the best thing and the worst thing about it, but is this the second best sport in America?
Well, without question, it's the second most popular, and by that, in my opinion, it's the second highest rated on a regular basis, without question. But you wouldn't know that if you watch daytime cable television.
Yeah.
They would have you believe that it's NFL, NBA, NFL, NBA, NFL, NBA, because that's easier to cover. And these debate shows are just about whatever they want to talk about. Okay, they're not covering sports. They're talking about whatever is easiest to discuss. It's the dumbing down of the sports narrative in this country. And one of the reasons why the media is doing it is because, A, you're not having to pay a news gathering operation to compete with SportsCenter, and B, if you're at ESPN, you recognize that SportsCenter is not as popular anymore. People prefer opinion, so they don't want to put opinion in SportsCenter. They would rather have opinion in every other show that's out there. And all you have to do is pay the producer, the director, the 3 or 4 camera people, and that's it. And so they pay these enormous amounts of money to these opinionists, okay, these embrace debaters, and they're talking about the same thing every day. So we're not really covering the number 2 most popular sport in America the way it should be covered as a result. Unless, of course, you're looking at the investment that's being made into the conference networks. You know, I applaud what the Big Ten Network and SEC Network did last week, preparation for the semifinals. I thought it was outstanding. And if you weren't watching them, then you weren't brought up to speed on who was available, what players had been sick, what players that they thought maybe would be game time decisions. You know, in electronic media, college football has become a conference network covered sport, and it's not being covered by the mainstream. And when I say mainstream, I'm talking about daily cable that is, owned and operated by the major powers that cover college athletics, and that's clearly the company I work for in ESPN, and it's not doing the job. Now, on the weekends, when Big Noon goes out, and ESPN, there's a lot of money invested in covering college football the right way once the game starts. But during the week, it's in witness protection.
Yeah,
You've got to watch the Big Ten or the SEC network. And that was one of the sad parts I thought for TCU last week. Name the team that was not either in the Big Ten or the SEC that was in the playoff. It was TCU. So you saw and heard much less about them than any of the other 3 teams play.
Tim, I hope you had a great weekend. Happy New Year to you, and we appreciate you very, very much in all of what you've brought to the table throughout college football season. We're not done with you, by the way, because I know you do college basketball. We'll get into that with you a little bit later on.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure coming on the show anytime. Thanks, fellas, and have a great rest of your New Year's. I'm loving this Utah Penn State game right now. I'm grinding it, and I know that you guys are too. Give my best to everyone in the Waco and surrounding area. Hope to see you soon, and guys, pretty soon we'll have Big 12 basketball coming back to Fox. So hope to be able to come in there to do some basketball games too.
You better let us know. That's Tim Brando, Fox Sports on many things.